Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eve Canty. I'm Core's Vice President of Partnership Development. Very excited to welcome you to our session today on a crisis of confidence, small and mid-sized colleges and their future prosperity. Before I get started, there's a few administrative items that I wanted to cover. You'll see the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the presentation, and we're saving 15 minutes for them at the end. You can also expect to receive materials from today's presentation within 24 hours of the event. I'm going to share my contact information so you can reach out to me if for whatever reason you don't receive them. And if you're not already following Core Education on LinkedIn, we'll be posting a copy of the recording there as well. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Rick Beyer. For those of you who aren't already familiar with his work, Rick is a successful businessman, entrepreneur, and one of our country's foremost thought leaders on the topic of higher education business model transformation. Rick was a successful technology CEO and senior operating executive of Trimble Navigation, a $1 billion public company, before transitioning focus exclusively on higher education. Rick is trustee emeritus and former board chair of his alma mater, Olivet College. He served on the board at American University, and he was a senior fellow and board member at the Association of Governing Boards. Rick is the founder and executive chairman of Core Education. Rick, it's so great to have you here today. I'm really looking forward to this presentation.
And great to be with you as well, Eve. As you know, enrollment declines. It's not only been happening maybe for institutions here or there, but around the country. We've experienced as an industry 10 consecutive years of enrollment decline. Today, we have about 43 million consumers with $1.8 trillion of student debt. You can see some of the other systemic issues that we're facing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the prosperity gap today, and then there's just simply the supply. There's more supply than demand of brick and mortar colleges, technology challenges, changing consumer behaviors, and just hundreds of colleges not financially viable, as according to the DOE financial composite ratios. And so what happens is that as a result of all of this systemic issues, the business model is under extreme pressure. So all of these culminate into the incrementalism is just not going to be enough. And that transformation is going to be required for really thinking about sustainability and prosperity. So when we think about the economic model is under extreme pressure, and there really are comprehensive and complex issues here that if you just try to deal with one of them in what I'm going to call a silo, you'll hear me talk a little bit more about silos. It's very, very tough to transform or provide some quantum movement on success. And again, the small mid-sized colleges are really carrying the brunt of the problems in terms of the business model challenge, because they just simply don't have the economies of scale, and that contributes then to lack of depth of resources and on and on. So when we talk a little bit about confidence, and I see this in the marketplace, and as I just talked to a lot of people, and I think about loss of confidence. This doesn't happen just at a college level, but it can happen at a business level or any organization, is when an organization just is unable to obtain the desired results, or an organization is experiencing continuous downward momentum over a long period of time. You get a lot of fatigue. Trustees disengage. You have a large population of college presidents that are leaving or retiring at an unprecedented rate, and the leaders are fatigued. Good people leave, and what I'm going to call loss of investor confidence. And even in nonprofits, there are investors, and those are your donors. And so what happens is that institutions start to pull in, and that becomes even more counterproductive, or they'll attempt to do something strategic using tactical funds. I hear a lot, we can't do this because we don't have the money. And I can tell you that that funding follows great plans, and funding follows transformation, and funding will follow great vision. And so one cannot start with the premise that we don't have money to do something. What you really need is really to help with the overall thought process. And this is areas, and of course, that CORE works on with its partners to build that confidence and build a very real vision in how you're going to get from point A to point B. And so what happens is that lack of confidence just ends up institutions are doing very, very small things and initiatives, and it's just not going to be enough to get to where you want to be to really be a healthy institution. So when we take a look at what we're all familiar with, and I was a small college president, and I really I saw this. I had very limited depth, and the whole thing was like, how do we trim back? How do we do more with less? And what happens is that has created a severe quality of earnings issue in the marketplace. And so a different model is required. So when we take a look at what I'll call prosperity gaps, I've done a lot of quality of earnings works for institutions. But what has happened is too many institutions have eroded their competitive position through continuous underinvestment. We can't pay our employees market rates, or we have depreciation, but we're running a structural deficit, so we can't fully fund equipment replacement or fully fund depreciation. And technology requirements are going up, but the technology budget has basically been stagnant. On and on, even including investing into the mission and academic support, program development. When you start to add all this up, it becomes pretty daunting. And so we have an industry with poor quality of earnings. And so again, doing some small things are really not going to address these big gaps, or cutting further is only going to erode quality of earnings and actually increase your prosperity gap to where you need to be in the future. But doing this prosperity gap will really help an institution set context, particularly with the board, in terms of where they need to be in the future, where are they at today, where they need to be in the future, and then a pathway year by year of what has to happen to get there. So my last slide on transformation is really going to think about how we think differently, how do we operate differently, and how deep we think about our problems, how deep we think about developing and implementing strategy. So you're going to see I'll give you some examples later on in this presentation that we need to go far beyond just fine tuning and status quo. So we have to think differently, and I'm going to show you some examples of how we can do that. So as we start to then think about, well, what are the alternative pathways forward for an institution? And what I try to do is show you 3 different areas. One, just what I'm going to call do it yourself, which in essence that's what we're doing today. We're doing it ourselves. But when we think about future pathways, that do it yourself model is going to require a strong balance sheet. You'll have to have either growth or M&A. But also, you could also look for support. I'll talk with you here about supporting organizations and the supporting organizations that are out in the market, including CORE, as well as one-to-one affiliations. I'll also address what is called change of control that an institution, particularly at the board, will want to be aware of. And then, of course, nobody generally picks that path to closure. But typically what happens, it's a result of a failed do-it-yourself model, and colleges have a weak balance sheet. So if you think about where you're at today, if you have an incredibly weak balance sheet, kind of look back 5 years or 7 years and see where you were at there then. And then now take a look at where you're at today. And you were on a do-it-yourself model. And so you can say, are we going to materially be able to turn this organization around and really get not only sustainability, but into prosperity? So it really, really requires one to look deeply, particularly at the board level with the president, to think much more deeply about long-term future. And so oftentimes what we'll see in the marketplace is what I'm going to call incrementalism. And so when we think about the incremental approach, one of the things that I've just observed, it just creates a lot of fatigue. It creates a lot of uncertainty. Continuous cost cutting, trimming around the edge, It creates limited thinking due to financial constraints and financial paradigms. Um, it focuses on kind of small improvements, kind of doing the same things better or working on small things when really big things need to be worked on. And it ultimately is a high probability of just continuous slow decline, which should then ultimately lead to your loss of mission. And so when you think about transformational, it's definitely one of much more improved confidence level, clarity and confidence in addressing your growth, revenue growth, and diversification, how effectively you are operating, how efficiently you're using technology, and a capital strategy that supports a new financial model. And really, this creates a much lower risk alternative to just what I'm going to call the limping ahead, incrementalism, and a much more higher probability to getting to that sustainability and prosperity. And a supporting organization such as Cork can actually help not only develop but implement these initiatives with its partners. So when I talk about introducing, not a lot of institutions have heard of supporting organizations. But what supporting organizations are, it provides a comprehensive shared services to participating institutions. And these can range from technology, compliance, marketing, enrollment, you name it. But more importantly, it enables an organization to access a deeper bench of human resources to accomplish big goals. So this is where, how do you accomplish these big goals with the resources and the people that you have today? And in essence, it's very, very difficult that you actually have to have a deeper bench. And so what we're saying, there's about 40 institutions today, and it's growing, who are now using supporting organizations to help transform their business model. And kind of the value proposition for these organizations are, as I said, the depth of resources and economies of scale, the innovative approaches that they can bring in collaboration with you, and they're an operating partner that can help solve the complex problems with you, not for you, but with you. And so when we think about who are out there, there's probably a couple of more other ones that are in development, but these four core, National University, TCS, and CHESS, are all out there. Both TCS and National have been out for about 11 years now. Very, very successful organizations. New Mexico is a little newer as well. But these numbers here are the number of institutions that are participating partners in those supporting organizations. So I'll give you an example of what economies of scale can do. So participating institutions actually have leverage, as a collective system budget can measure into the hundreds of millions of dollars. So for example, one institution might have just a program budget of $50 million versus a system with a collective budget of 500 million, or a collective technology budget of 30 million versus 2 million for an individual institution. And it allows many, many more options to transform tech, business processes, workflows, revenue growth, programming, operations within an institution. Also, what can happen is the supporting organizations can attract and retain top talent as they fractionalize costs across the system. So individuals also at the supporting organization are part of a larger team that has a substantial amount of collaboration. B2B corporate marketing people or the technology department, they all can collaborate together. Or a very detailed example is maybe take a cybersecurity expert and a student acquisition workflow expert. They can work across multiple institutions, whereby it would be prohibitively inexpensive to hire that expertise and to work full-time and manage that effectively for one individual institution. So looking at the business insights, generally speaking, all of these supporting organizations that I mentioned are what I just call a cost recovery model. It's a very open book. You see what the costs are, and that's what the costs are. There's not a revenue share. It's not a consulting model. It's not what I'll call an OPM or the online program management models that take big revenue shares. And the contracts vary. So each institution generally will sign an individual device service agreement, and then they can expand the level of services based on their own needs. So this is just generally how the supporting organizations work. Important is what I'm going to call decision rights and control considerations. So on the left-hand side, some organizations will require a change of control at the board and bylaw level. It doesn't mean it's bad. It does allow for more robust participation of shared services, but board consent rights are a trade-off. This is also an area if a college is thinking about being on what I'll call the sell side of things, if they want to look for a strategic partner, a stronger strategic partner, typically a change of control will happen. And it's very important if boards are looking at that direction, that they very, very early on talk about what does change of control mean. And it doesn't mean it needs to be bad, but oftentimes it's a hurdle that's sometimes too high for organizations. And so what you'll want to understand is if you're going to go down to a merger route where you're on what I'll call the sell side, there is going to be a change of control. And sometimes boards aren't really fully aware of these requirements. The not change of control is where both chess and core is at. Basically, individual institutions opt in, and there's no change of control. And there's actually multiple service agreements at the institutional level that develop over time. So you'll want to know both change of control and no change of control, even if you don't look at supporting organizations. So just moving on a little bit in the third part, I'll spend about 10, 12 minutes on is just talking a little about who we are as a public benefit corporation. Our sole mission is to help transform the business model for small and mid-sized institutions. And what we're able to do is create a culture of prosperity for our partners. And we can leverage our economies of scale to help those partners achieve the operational effectiveness, the technology efficiency, and the market expansion to allow those institutions to not only be sustainable long-term, but prosper long-term. And the way we do it is, of course, through innovative shared service, but also becoming your operating partner. And we do this without a change of control. So these are the 15 institutions. We have 2 that we haven't yet announced that we'll be announcing at the end of the month. But most importantly, these are almost all very traditional, what I'm going to call brick and mortar liberal art colleges. All of them are different, but CORE works with each one of these institutions on a standalone basis to help meet their direct needs. And so when we think about the prosperity, we have to look at prosperity through a different lens. Too often what we're doing is we're taking just what we know and sometimes with the constraints that we place upon ourselves, and we're trying to find the answers. And what we have to do is think about it and looking at it through a different lens. And one of the things is that our team is deep and not only strategic, but operational. And they can look at things differently. They can use business intelligence to help work with an institution to really help create and implement a transformational plan. So as a supporting organization, our staff operates as part of your team. We're part of your team. So through our economies of scale, we continue to build best-in-class, functional senior team members with a depth of talent that would just otherwise not be able to be affordable. And this team, along with a supporting cast of about 90 people, support our institutional partners. And so here's an example of when we think about transformation and thinking differently. So kind of on the left side, we have an enrollment problem. Should we spend more money on lead generation? Should we hire a new rep? Should we think about adding a new program? And when we really look at what we could do here and how we can flip it and think differently, we consistently see we have a workflow and processing and operating rhythm and policy problems that negatively impact our enrollment yield. This is generally a bullseye of transformational thinking on some of the enrollment areas. And so fixing, when you're trying to improve on a process that's broken, what you generally need is a new process. And we'll help you think through that. We'll help work with you to implement that. And one of the things that we see all the time is that we have to, and we're able to successfully help eliminate the silos. It happens over time, but the transformation requires that we start to break them down or have more horizontal thinking, because our silos have been created over time. And that becomes both not only for vendors, but organizational silos. So a vendor might handle a certain particular area, but they're just in a functional area here or a vertical area. And in order to make significant change, you might have to impact 2 or 3 departments to actually have an impact. So just we'll hear, should we spend more on lead generation? And we'll say, well, let's look at your yield. Let's look at your processes. If we can see that they're broken, let's fix those. Let's measure them. And as we see them improve, then you can actually spend more marketing dollars. But you don't want to throw more money at a broken process. This is kind of thinking and many times over that we can do with the partners. This is about how our partners are engaging with us. There's no kind of pattern here other than what we tried to do is focus on these 3 areas where they tend to be. So we have several that are full prosperity partnerships. That means redesigning their financial model, really getting into what we'll call strategic growth, building blocks, diversification of revenue, and really going from what I'm going to call a high subsidy model to a low subsidy model. And moving revenue cycles and moving your diversification of revenue, from a very concentrated revenue to more diversified, taking your revenue cycles from, say, 2 revenue cycles a year, which might be your traditional undergraduate campus, going from 2 revenue cycles to 200 revenue cycles per year. And what we do is help by being champions for prosperity and for your prosperity. And we have several partners where they wanted help directly in technology. And we have a very, very deep technology bench. Just in the areas of technology, there's 35 different subject matter experts that you need. In cybersecurity alone, there's about 5. So just being able to try to get your head around that. And so one of the things that we do is we have a very deep bench. And as I said, with the economies of scale, we can absolutely impact technology, not only what I'm going to call the operational or the network and the student information, but also what I'll call revenue technology, the technology that directly impacts revenue of the college. And then you can see on some of the general shared services goes from governance strategy, how do we unlock the balance sheet, how do you look at venture philanthropy as part of your capital strategy, on and on. And these are all individually focused, and depending on the distinct challenges and direction that an institution wants to work. And then just my last couple of slides is kind of the phased approach. This is generally how we would work with institutions. Is we spend a lot of time in education, just helping build a collective awareness with the president, board leadership, senior cabinet members, and then also just understanding how does it work and what's possible. And that's really important. What's possible regarding transforming the model and what's possible regarding new heights of success. And then as we understand more fully, we can then start to find alignment with everybody about what might be and the opportunity for transformation. And then that just leads to what I'll call a decision readiness for what I'll call a partnership study. That isn't even the end goal line. We really want to help get to know the institution, but we can actually move quite rapidly as well. We have a depth of team experts that can move on this. So this would be an example of a comprehensive partnership study that generally would last about 2 months. You can see financials, operating rhythms, technology, 3 to 4 growth building blocks, strategic growth building blocks. That could also include understanding programming opportunities, making operating model recommendations based on key financial ratios and metrics, We'll outline new financial models, the capital strategy, cash flow outlook, and then provide recommendations for how the supporting organization can assist with the implementation. And so my final slide, and we'll open it up for questions, is that these are some of the strategic rationale for, say, an operating partnership with the supporting organization, such as CORE. And you can see these in terms of when we think about short, medium, and long term. So short term for us right now, although we're still in helping a number of our institutions reach those final goals for fiscal 23 that we're finishing this end of this month, but we're also helping not only to try to lock up the freshman class for October or August, but we also short term is this upcoming fiscal year that we're about ready to start, fiscal 24. All of that fits into our short term thinking. How do we move your numbers? How do we get the organization moving forward? Medium thinking would be the following year, say the second year. A little longer term would be your third or fourth year. Steve, I'm going to stop this right now and come up for air and see if we have some questions, and let you moderate that for me if you could.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick. And we have received a couple of really great questions from the audience. Please do feel free to submit any other questions that you may have. So the first one that I want to start out with is a question that we received. How do I fund transformation when I already need to cut next year's budget?
Right. Well, let's break it up between tactical money and strategic money. Okay. So in your budget is all tactical money, and you have very little of it. You have very little discretionary money in your budget. So you should not think about it. You should think about it almost being a non-starter, that you can't fund that. So you have to, but don't let your funding paradigm prevent you, because all you're doing is spinning downwards. You have to keep working on hitting your numbers and adjust your budget accordingly. But in parallel, what you have to do, and this is why board leadership is so important with the president, to stand back and say, let's develop a real viable plan for sustainability and prosperity. And let's do it in a timely manner. Let's figure out how we need to implement, what we're going to do, and how much is it going to cost. And then what happens is capital opens up. Capital opens up, and that's where your strategic capital is. So as I said, funding is going to follow great plans and great vision. Funding is going to follow transformation. So separate those two out. Next, Steve.
Great. Thanks for that answer. So this next question says, I realize that messaging is toward private small colleges. Do you have any specific advice or insights for small state colleges?
Well, we have focused pretty much exclusively on privates, although just over the last month, I've had really our first detailed conversation with a small regional state institution. The answer is we would be happy to help. We're typically working with the president in the boards at small privates. So oftentimes the public boards might have some constraints in themselves. So we see those as two different markets. But I would say that number one, our mission is to help small and mid-sized institutions. So I would encourage, if somebody wants to talk, be happy to talk with them.
Great, thanks. So this next question says, if all small and mid-sized colleges transform the same way, what will separate or define each of them? How can they continue to draw students? How can they stand out from one another if they're working with the same vendors, offering the same certificates, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm going to start with the question. Just one comment on the question. What we don't want to do is build what I'm going to call a flawed assumption, put great logic on a flawed assumption. Okay, so if you take an assumption that isn't necessarily true, you can build a lot of great logic, but ultimately it can potentially be flawed. So I would say that institutions will never transform the same way. They just never, ever will. All you have to do is your benchmark is you. And too many times we're looking at all the other institutions and they're really not doing much. They're into incrementalism. And if you keep following that pathway, you're just going to follow yourself down, potentially down a path of decline. So now let's go to that really great parts of those questions. How do we separate and define each other? Okay, how do we continue to draw students?
Institutional will and resolve, okay, is very, very important. Let me give you an example. If you're an institution that has a high concentration of undergraduate campus-based students, let's define very high as 90% or more, okay, or 85. That's a real reliant on what I want to call a declining market. I do see institutions trying to hold on to that, and rightfully so, okay? But what you also have to do is have the willingness to serve other students. And those students aren't necessarily looking at a campus-based undergraduate experience. So if you can become willing, and that includes the faculty and everybody, to be willing that, no, we don't want to change who we are. We're not going to change our mission. We want to strengthen our mission, but we also understand that there's other students of learning, and there are many markets that are growing. If you have the willingness, then a supporting organization like CORE can identify those for you and show you how to get into those. And then also, how do you stand out? And especially, I think, if you're partnering with the same vendors, which many colleges are, they're just doing the same thing over and over and over. And that's why you have to kind of break out of that. So when we're looking at our organization right now of a staff of 90 supporting 15 institutions, it's growing. And oftentimes just doing the same thing over and over and trying to get different results or meaningful results is really tough. But the value proposition is very important. So speed and service. Okay, let's just say, how do you differentiate? There's so many ways to differentiate. Serving students and serving them faster. We're working with a number of our partners right now on redesigning their application, redesigning their workflow, redesigning how quickly they can process students. And the students appreciate that. And so what your differentiation will come through a number of different areas. How you offer, support, and deliver your product. Great question, really great question. But it's amazing what you can do. And I can tell you, sometimes institutions will, I don't want to say get an inferiority complex, but they sometimes say, we don't deserve to be really great. We've struggled for a long time. And I'm telling institutions, look, you can achieve whatever you can imagine. Okay. So, let's take a look at, I have a slide for another presentation on, Southern New Hampshire University, and I was under the heading of who gave them the right to do what they did, right? They were this small New Hampshire college, a very, very small, tiny college, and went into, quote, internet learning. Okay. Who gave them that right to do that? And all of a sudden things started to blossom. I was just involved with, Hilbert College, a nice liberal arts college in Buffalo, acquiring Valley College, a small for-profit college that really allowed Hilbert to diversify its revenue and move beyond its campus operation. But who gave them that right? But it was a presidential vision and the support of the board. And now you take a look at, although there was one failed big for-profit acquisition, with University of Idaho acquiring University of Phoenix. Well, who gives them the right to do that? So one of the things that we have is that we have a lot of confidence. That's why I call about the loss of confidence, that confidence crisis. And I'm telling you, I'm so bullish on small, mid-sized colleges that they can do things. They actually can be more nimble. And that's really why CORE exists. Back to you, Eve.
Great. Thanks for such a rich answer there. So we got another question in here. You mentioned, Rick, about, online education when that was the frontier for higher ed. We got a question now about one of the next frontiers, which is workforce development. It's becoming the topic of the day. Does CORE do anything to assist institutions with these initiatives, and would we consider that strategic?
Well, short answer is yes. Let me start with CORE's academic operations team. Okay, so it starts with an academic operations team that is an extension of our partners. So if you think about it at your institution right today, who's working on these forward-thinking areas? Who's working on not only just the strategy, but the tactics? there's a paradigm that you have to develop everything yourself. Okay, this is an old paradigm. There's incredible amount of really strong, high quality education content that colleges can actually license and then private label for them in the areas of healthcare, in the areas of technology, advanced manufacturing. And so the academic operation team at CORE is about 4 or 5 people are curating content or acting as that operational team for institutions. So today, CORE institutions partners have about 50 credentials, all available to them on the platform, all private labeled for them. And they all start, not all of them, but probably 90% of them start at any time. So when you think about getting into that acceleration of revenue cycles, I'll go back to who gives everybody the right. Greensboro College in North Carolina, who gave them the right to go into healthcare? When people say, well, you haven't been in healthcare, who gave them the right to go into aerospace and technology or to advanced manufacturing? It's when you have presidential vision aligned with the board and the board support, you can actually accomplish so many things. And so this whole area of skill sets is very tough for an institution to implement. And if you don't have the depth, and it takes depth to do that, this would be a really one example of, yes, we do that, and the many people that we have working on that for our team.
Great, thanks so much. So Rick, I know you've mentioned before that transformation is not always easy and the pathway forward can look different. One of our questions kind of speaks to that. I assume there are reductions in workforce under some of these scenarios. Is that true? How big can some of those changes be?
It's a really good question, as that's oftentimes the question. I'm going to say generally not. Okay. And the reason is let me go back to a slide that I showed on the quality of earnings. Okay. If the quality of earnings are strong, okay, then there could be some opportunities for what I would call real cost savings. But what's happened is that our institutions have just been cutting headcount, cutting. They're so far cut, there's not much more to cut. And so it creates what I'm going to call even more of the complexity about how to turn around an institution. So we're about transformation. So every once in a while, we'll work with an institution that's just what I'm going to call bloated in terms of people. But boy, that's not the bell curve. The bell curve is that we've cut so much. Where are you going to cut? You've got to move forward. So sometimes you might have an institution where very capable of understanding the where margins are, and we're very thoughtful about, like, for example, when we take a look at the financial ratios, particularly the academic ratio, how much does it cost to just deliver education? Everything put aside, just education, nothing overhead, kind of faculty, salaries, benefits, adjuncts, academic support, divided into net tuition after discount. And that alone is an incredible number to look at, because it's really kind of the central nervous system of the financial model, in terms of that's what I'll call the cost of goods sold, to understand how much margin you have. We'll look at that. If the margins are very, very low that it produced, it could be a function of several areas. It could be a function of institution just too small. You got way too many programs, not enough people. But it just could be a size. It could be a product mix problem, such as transfer students. There's great opportunities for transfer students, and we still see great opportunities for that. But so if you thought having a larger junior and senior class, your margins alone, just at the cost of goods sold, are going to get much better right away. But that takes workflow changes, it takes marketing changes, emphasis changes, and then it also then can say, wow, a supporting organization can help focus in on that. Every once in a while, a program cut here or there, but I'm telling you, it's the rare exception. We do every once in a while see, an institution that might be bloated. Generally, when we see that, the endowments are larger because they've been comfortable with running really high deficits because they have the financials to cover that. but we're even seeing now that institutions are saying we just can't carry this kind of loss. But in general, we're focused on moving forward in a positive way, that we create a culture of prosperity. And that really means having our team work collectively with your team.
Great. Thanks so much. One of the next questions that came in says, what is your process that you use to help a college rebuild a mission and a vision?
Yeah, let's take mission first. Let's take mission, because oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, I just stake in the ground, everybody talks about the mission, but they generally underinvest in the mission, right? And so one of the things that we first have to say, like, what are the investments that we need to make the mission stronger, okay? And it's not we talk about mission, but our actions towards funding mission is generally not really good. And this goes into the quality of earnings, right? Your mission, right? You're not spending enough on your mission. We start adding these things up. That also kind of tells the institution you have to transform. So you might want to pick the 1, 2, or 3 big areas. Don't focus on small things, big areas that will help you rebuild your mission. Okay, big areas, not small things like, well, we could do this and this. While you can do that, we're talking about systemic issues here. So let's think about really big, meaningful things that can help build that mission. Now let's talk about the vision, about where you need to go. It's a couple of things. You've got your vision here, or your mission, but we also have to have a viable economic model. Okay, so what it generally will look like, unless you have a big endowment, it will generally look more diversified in revenue, more service oriented, a lot more business intelligence that you would rely on to operate. It would be, you'd have a lot more technology. And so then you'd have to put together the capital strategy and also what I'll call an operating plan. The operating plan is who's doing what, when, and the accountability. And this is where the supporting organization comes in, and really a new opportunity for thinking differently, because institutions sometimes they don't know where they're going to get the talent, or they don't say, like, I don't come looking around, we can't get there with what we have. So we're about bringing in additional people to help you get there. And so you have to have that operating model, who's going to do what, and then a capital strategy. Now, for some institutions, I mentioned mergers and affiliations. Some institutions that we're now working with are now looking to go on what I'm going to call the buy side. Remember that, who gave them the right to do these things? But what's happening is that when we go into and start thinking about things differently and start thinking about transformation in a different way, the confidence factor goes up when they say, wow, I've got a lot more resources. And all of a sudden, those institutions are now starting to think, wait a minute, I can go on the buy side. I can do things differently than I could before. And so it's not only just about, for some institutions, it's generally about organic growth and where we can help. But for also other institutions, it's not only that, but it also is even on the buy side of M&A.
Great. I think we have time for just a few more questions. So the next question says, when is the right time to involve my cabinet in a conversation about these new operating models?
So a president, I would say there's definitely two sides of the equation. The president's like the heart and soul. It begins and ends with the president. But the president aligned with the board can move a mountain, can absolutely move a mountain. And what we'll see, generally speaking, is it's so important critically to have your team there. But oftentimes the senior cabinet, because they'll have some paradigms like, we don't have any money, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, sometimes go into a much more of a tactical viewpoint of things. So sometimes it's good for the president alone to get knowledge, or to a president align with, say, the board chair, or say an executive committee, to be able to get aligned about, look, we've got to think differently. We really need to look way beyond, because oftentimes the senior cabinet is just involved in day-to-day. I mean, there's so much on their plate, and just getting them to stand back and think strategically is tough. and oftentimes I said it'll go really quickly into tactical mode. So it's really up to the president, but I would say it happens pretty quickly. It's a very normal part. But I would say for a president and a board, if we look at some of our most successful partnerships, it's where the president and the board got aligned. And then all of a sudden we started adding the president started adding key cabinet members, because this is really truly about transformation. When it comes down to the capital strategy, the board also has to own the capital strategy. And there's some great opportunities for what we call venture philanthropy. We've helped a couple of our partners raise money for their transformation. Money will follow great ideas, great plans. And that's why the board has to be involved. The board has to support and provide that support to the president. Then all of a sudden the cabinet can now start to open up and think differently.
Great. We have time for one more question here. So, Rick, you've talked about colleges having, the audacity to think about being on the buy side of a transaction. How would something like shared services or, the other topics we've been talking about today, how would that compare to a merger?
Let me quickly go on the buy side. Let's just talk about an institution that's getting really confident, saying, no, we think we might want to go on the buy side. There's two really important parts of a buy side transaction. And the first one is the strategic rationale to do a transaction. The strategic rationale to do a transaction with X institution or X organization, and you see all the benefits. But the second one is critically as important, and generally where organizations stumble is, okay, that sounds great. How are you gonna execute on it? And that's where a supporting organization can help to say, well, I want my supporting organization, they're gonna help me execute. Without that, that becomes the next hurdle. I've seen a number of buy-side institutions have a lot of great plans, but then get stifled at the board level because the board didn't have the confidence that they saw it, the strategic rationale, but they didn't have the confidence that they could actually execute on it. So that's where a supporting organization can come in. On the sell side, if an institution is working with a supporting organization and wants to look through for a merger, because they just need some help, but they're just not confident that they feel long-term they need to be part of something, then that supporting organization can actually help and look at. So not only capital strategies, but then the supporting organization, we can help take them through a process and help them build their own value proposition. But you can't go what I'll call hat in hand on the sell side. You can't say, well, I wish somebody would take me over. We will help you build your value proposition to really help another institution or organization get excited about you. So there's two parts of that. And then those institutions say, no, we just want to be incredibly independent. We may or may not do M&A, but we know we're totally firm on independence, and we totally support that. Then having a supporting organization can help you reach some of those big goals. Eve, back to you.
I think that's all the questions we have time for today. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been such a great dialogue, and I've really learned a lot today.
Well, thank you. And again, for anybody who wants to learn more about us or just want to have a Zoom session, reach out to Eve or myself. We'll be happy to. We really appreciate everyone's time and look forward to connecting in the future. Thanks again.